In some of the states, there are impediments to just switching someone out like that. 14 million people went through the process and chose this nominee, Joe Biden. Now a handful of people have gotten together and decided he's no longer suitable. That's not how this system works. They are violating democratic principles. And I think that's a real problem, and I think there'll be a lot said about that in the days ahead.
This is Democracy Watch. Mark, that was Mike Johnson. And of course, as we all know, there's been a lot of talk about legal challenges from people like Republican Speaker Mike Johnson. So to be clear, are there any legal obstacles that would prevent Kamala Harris from becoming the Democratic nominee now that Joe Biden has stepped aside?
Absolutely not. There is 0.000% chance that Mike Johnson and his fevered dream of somehow there being legal action to prevent Kamala Harris or whoever the Democratic National Committee nominates and submits to the states to keep them off the ballot. There is no chance that will happen. You know, Mike Johnson has been hanging out with insurrectionists for so long that he has flipped the legal from the illegal. Mike, this is legal. What you all did in 2020 was illegal.
So what's going to happen next? Like, what should viewers keep an eye out for this week?
Look, what will happen next is right now, Kamala Harris is accumulating supporters, delegates at a very, very fast clip. She so far is the only announced candidate. So you should expect that will continue on the sort of political track. On the legal track, the Rules and Bylaws Committee, which is the committee of the Democratic National Committee that sets the rules, hence the name, for how the nomination process takes place. They have announced that they are going to have a meeting on Thursday. They're going to put out draft rules in advance of that on Tuesday. And so that will lay out the process. But, I think that at this point, regardless of what that process is, it is pretty clear that Kamala Harris is going to be the Democratic nominee for president in the general election in 2024.
Now, how fast after the meeting on Thursday will we have any indication as to some finalized plan?
So, I think that, frankly, they will likely finalize the plan and vote on the plan on Thursday. Okay. I think that what you'd expect is that they are going to put out a draft of what the rules are before that, and then there'll be a meeting to either adopt the draft or, in theory, they could send it back. But, I think they would either adopt it or else make some revisions to it, but adopt the final version then on Thursday.
Now, I want to switch your attention here over to Donald Trump's frantic Truth Social posts. He had posted that basically alleging that Democrats were committing fraud because Republicans spent tens of millions of dollars on a convention that was focused solely on attacking Joe Biden, only for Joe Biden, of course, to step back and not run in 2024. And so Donald Trump is alleging that it's all a waste. And so Democrats are now on the line to pay him back that money for this purported fraud. What's your reaction to that?
I mean, first of all, Donald Trump is an expert in fraud. So he's got that going for him, just like Mike Johnson is an expert in frivolous legal arguments, right? So they're sort of lining up to type here. But of course, it's not a fraud. The Republican Party spent the money that it spent campaigning on the issues that it wished to campaign on, including, for example, Donald Trump's golf game. An underappreciated topic at the convention
right.
were various speakers attesting to his golf game. They're obviously panicking. Donald Trump is panicking. His campaign did this big spread with, I think it was Tim Alberta in the Atlantic, in which they boasted that, they were going to cruise to a big victory because they had Joe Biden all figured out. I'm not sure they had Joe Biden all figured out to begin with, but they definitely, I don't think, have a plan to run against Kamala Harris. And so, Donald Trump is now sort of rage tweeting in the middle of the night. Or rage, truthing, falsity, whatever it's called.
Yeah, he's just raging in the middle of the night, I think is the nice blanket term that we'll go with here. So what's your response to the desperate Republican talking point that this was a coup and that somehow Republicans are now the party of democracy?
Okay, so first of all, they are definitely experts in coups. I mean, let's just start with the fact that the effort to stage an insurrection to overturn the free and fair election on January 6, 2021 was arguably a coup, or at least coup-like. Donald Trump sent his lawyers to the U.S. Supreme Court with the hypothetical that he, if elected president, could engage in a coup, as well as assassinate his political opponents without facing any criminal sanctions. So they definitely have coup on the brain. And, I joke about that, but it is actually something very, very serious that I hope we turn to before the interview ends about, kind of what the stakes are here. But of course, it's not a coup. I mean, the process of American democracy is that each of the political parties nominate their candidates pursuant to their party rules. And, the DNC's party rules, like the Republicans' party rules, both of them, have always provided that there would be delegates who are selected before the convention and before the nominating process, if that takes place in advance of the convention, as we saw in 2020. That it is ultimately the delegates that vote that are the final sort of check and the final requirement for there to be a nominee. And for decades in our country, the rule was that actually primaries and caucuses didn't really count at all, right? They were chosen. It was really all the delegates. So it was only the delegates. So this is not a coup. This is American democracy. I do find it interesting that the same people who are constantly telling me that democracy docket should not be called democracy docket because we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic, now they are all saying this is not democratic. So right. It is democratic, but I'm glad at least they have dropped that silly little pretense they go through.
And of course, as we get deeper into this process and everything becomes finalized and the rules become fleshed out and we have a little bit more clarity in terms of what we can be looking at moving forward, that will all be included on Democracy Docket, which is the free news outlet Marc founded to focus on everything voting and elections. So for those watching right now, if you're not yet subscribed, please make sure to subscribe. It's an amazing resource that I use on a daily basis. Marc, broadly speaking, what was your reaction to this shocking news that President Biden wouldn't be running for re-election?
Look, my reaction was that it really illustrates the difference between the two parties, right? The Republican Party decided that it was going to nominate a narcissistic authoritarian who is a convicted felon on 34 counts, who had been twice impeached and who was responsible for the January 6th insurrection at the nation's capital. Notwithstanding the fact that the Republican Party knew all of that about them, every single Republican of any stature, all the members of Congress, all the House, the governors, they all rallied behind this guy. And that is the Republican Party. On the Democratic side, President Biden deserves an enormous amount of credit. He recognized the situation that had developed within the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party had a very public and somewhat painful discussion about what the right way forward was. And President Biden will be remembered as a patriot and a hero for doing the kind of thing that, frankly, Donald Trump is incapable of and the Republican Party is resistant to doing, which is to understand that the most important thing is to protect the country, to protect our democracy. And the stark relief of the two political parties has never been greater than we have seen over the last week to 10 days. Yeah,
that's perfectly put. I mean, the dichotomy on display where you have one person who voluntarily and selflessly relinquished power that he already had in deference to what would be best for democracy versus a guy who was so intent on clinging on to power that wasn't even his anymore because he'd already lost the election that he went so far as to incite an insurrection and seek to assassinate his own vice president for not bending to his will, all so that he could retain that power. I mean, it doesn't get more clear than that in terms of the priorities of the two parties on full display and really a commentary on what this upcoming election in November is going to be about. So
and I want to say, because I said I wanted to come back to this, the last 10 days have illustrated, hopefully, to everyone what the stakes are. We've had a lot of conversations over the course of the last year about, what happens if Joe Biden wins, what are his policies, what are Donald Trump. I think the stakes are clearer now than ever before. So I think we need to, again, tell everyone that there is nothing more important that you are going to do then make sure you are registered to vote. Your friends and your family are registered to vote, and that they vote for Kamala Harris and the entire Democratic ticket from top to bottom. That is what we need to all be focused on for this November, because the stakes of that of us not doing that are that Donald Trump, who is the worst impulse of the worst political party, could be back in power.
And I would also add that once you kind of cross that threshold into the kind of government that he wants to usher in, it's difficult, if not impossible, to come back from that. So this is our chance right now to make sure that we, either continue to function as a democracy, or it's a fundamentally different country than it is right now. With that said, again, for those watching right now, to support the invaluable work that Marc and his team are doing, please make sure to sign up for Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Teller Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.